Washington Journal continues.
Joining us this morning from El Paso, Texas, is Angela Kocherga. She is the news director and border reporter for KTEP Public Radio. Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Kocherga. Let's begin with the situation on the border.
Well, we continue to see large numbers of people come across, both families and what the Border Patrol calls unaccompanied minors. These are children in some cases, but often teenagers who are coming over looking to ask for asylum. So a large number of people and real concerns about overcrowding in some of the Border Patrol holding stations that were not designed for long-term holding of adults even, but now we've got children crowded into these facilities. And we are seeing a real ramp up very quickly by the Biden administration to open more health and human services shelters so that the children can be moved into those locations and then reunited with a family member or a sponsor while their cases move through immigration court. And we just had a facility open here in El Paso at Fort Bliss, our large military installation here that can have up to 5,000 beds. We had 500 children enter that facility yesterday for the first time.
When did the rise in numbers occur?
It's been going on for months now, dating back to when the Trump administration was still in office. We did have a slowdown during the pandemic because a lot of countries were, had their own lockdowns and people couldn't move around. But we started to see it pick up, in the winter and then, of course, leading into the election. Now we see these seasonal surges or spikes. I kind of want to get away from the word surge. It sounds like we have, hordes of people coming across. These are numbers that we have seen in the past of families and children and others coming, often to look for work, but also fleeing situations in Central America, from violence to corruption, gangs, and of course, poverty, and now we have climate change. So we saw it dating back, several months and starting to build. And now, as Secretary Mayorkas said, on pace, if something doesn't change, to be the largest increase we've seen in 2 decades.
I want to bounce this headline off of you from the Washington Times here in Washington, D.C. Biden team was warned on border policy. Team officials say huge migrant surge should come as no surprise to them.
Well, I mean, these warnings also went out, they go out to all administrations as a new one comes into office. We see right before a new president takes office, months leading up, a surge. We saw that increase in people before President Trump took office, as people either tried to get in quickly because they were worried about a hardline immigration policy taking effect. And again, we saw that before President Biden took office, as people try and figure out, is this my time to go? So the warning, I can't vouch for that because I wasn't in those meetings, but we do know also that there was a slow transition and information beyond a warning. Secretary Mayorkas has been part of DHS for many, many years. I'm sure he was well aware of what was happening on the ground.
When an unaccompanied child crosses the border, first of all, how are they getting here? And when they cross, what do they do?
Well, first of all, toddlers are not making their way up to the border on their own. We know that there are smuggling networks that move all sorts of people, and people rely on what they call guides because it's very dangerous to travel on your own. These areas are controlled by organized crime groups. There's corruption with local officials in many cases, and these are dangerous journeys. So, of course, the children are brought up with the guide. Sometimes they're also with a different relative, not a parent, perhaps a grandmother, an aunt, and uncle who's traveling with the child. And so they are not the legal guardian, so they are not allowed to cross with the child. But then the children are sent across the border. They are taken into custody, and we're talking about children, but also the large number of young people are between the ages of 12 and 17. So lots of teenagers. They are taken into custody, and Border Patrol has holding cells, for lack of a better word, for all the people that they encounter. They're supposed to be in these holding stations for no longer than 72 hours for children. And often this is taking longer to to move them into Health and Human Services custody because there's been a lack of bed space and facilities. But once they are moved into these facilities, they're cared for in a much better environment, while Health and Human Services and partner agencies look for family members and or sponsors who are suitable to take care of the children while their cases move through immigration court. And often these children, it must be noted, are coming up to reunite with a parent who has been in the U.S. unauthorized, often working and sending money home.
Do many of them have someone in the United States that will vouch for them? And then if they don't, what happens?
Well, if Health and Human Services and advocacy organizations that work with migrants tell us the vast majority do have a relative in the U.S. who can vouch for them and care for them. And that's been through multiple administrations. There was a concern about people not coming forward during the Trump administration because legal status was being checked. If they don't have someone, there are sponsors who are vetted and checked as with any child who's put into custody of someone who's not their parent. And there are also foster care situations where families will take in the children. We've seen that in the past. And finally, there are some a little bit longer term facilities where children can wait while their cases move through immigration court.
If the person that is their sponsor or they're vouching for them, if that person is not a legal citizen, they are allowed to go with them?
They are because these are parents, and the goal is to, in the majority of the cases, you want a child to be with their parent unless there's some extenuating circumstance. So yes, and this again has been going on for multiple administrations. That's been the common practice.
What about families that we are hearing about that are crossing the border and claiming asylum? What happens to them?
Well, right now, I just reported on this recently, most of them are just turned right back around and sent to Mexico. And the Biden administration is acknowledging that. Right now, we have a health order that dates back to the 40s called Title 42. It was implemented when the pandemic started, and it basically allows Border Patrol to quickly remove people from the country and send them back, in this case, to Mexico, which is where they crossed. And so they are sent back to Mexico. There are some that are allowed in and to stay, but the vast majority are not. They often, when they're returned to Mexico, seem very confused and distraught because people had the idea that if they came through and asked for asylum, they would be allowed to stay. In Mexico's struggling to find shelter space. Many of the shelters where I am, just across the border from El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, are filled to capacity. And I met a young mother who was in Juarez who had basically been abandoned by her guide and had run out of money, and she was living on the streets. She too had thought she'd be able to come across and ask for asylum. She said her husband had been murdered back in El Salvador, and she was trying to get to Maryland, where she had a daughter who'd been living for years working. But she was, in her words, trapped right there on the border. And she was at the bridge asking Mexican officials, the bridge where she'd been returned, International Bridge, if they could help her find shelter. And her little child was, kept calling out to her. And I said, well, what does he want? Does he understand what's going on? And she said, well, he just keeps asking, Mama, when can we go home? So we have some real tragic situations unfolding individually and in multiple times with different families.
And the reason why they are not allowed to claim asylum right now is because of the pandemic.
Correct. That Title 42, because you don't want a lot of people moving across, and they're still moving across, but they want people sent back to Mexico.
You said there are some that are allowed to claim asylum. What is the criteria?
Well, the ones who are being allowed in, and that started last month, are the people who were in the Remain in Mexico program, the migrant protection protocol established during the last administration that forced people to wait in Mexico while their hearings were finally called in the United States. That kind of outsourced our whole asylum process. The Biden administration ended that. And so groups of people are allowed in an orderly way across ports of entry or international bridges. they all have to have a negative COVID test before they can enter the U.S. And so those are the people. And there are a few exceptions. It's unclear what that criteria is for people who are crossing right now who are allowed to stay.
What about the unaccompanied minors? Are they given COVID testing or vaccinations?
They're not given vaccinations because we're not giving vaccinations right now to children in the U.S., but they are, it's unclear that some we're hearing are being tested because we are hearing there are a good number who are positive. It depends on which congressperson you talk to get the statistic. Others we are told, like the families who might be released, if some of them are tested by NGOs and who have shelters, and when they find someone who's COVID positive, not children, but families with children, they are isolated and quarantined until they're deemed healthy enough to travel. But to be honest, it's unclear how many of the children are tested or what the percentage of results are. There are lots of children, so I think it would be hard to test every single one of them right now.
Robin in Cullman, Alabama, you are up first for this discussion. Go ahead.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Thank you. My comment is, my question first is, how many migrant children died during the cold spell in Texas this past season? Were there? And I'd like to answer that question. Then I have a follow-up question.
Well, we don't know exactly how many children died. We haven't seen any statistics on that. We do know some of the migrant families coming through had to be rescued by Border Patrol, and I think there were a few deaths from hypothermia, very small number. We're still trying to get a handle here in Texas on how many people actually died statewide from that deadly winter storm. So we don't have those statistics. But not a huge number. But of course, any individual dies is, as far as a child would be tragic. Border Patrol does have to report deaths, and we heard last week of a 9-year-old girl who they found who had died on the Eagle Pass stretch of border, and investigating what caused her death. She was trying to cross from Mexico, and she was a Mexican child. So still trying to get details on what happened there.
Robin, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, 111 people were known to have died through that, and you only know of one child migrant that died, and that's all the statistics you have. And also, AOC said that not to use the word surge, and I see that you are trying not to use the word surge. And I just understand why that's a good word to use. Why not use it?
And you see me struggling because what I'm trying to do is, and you notice the word crisis is another one, trying to do a better job as journalists describing the situation on the ground and giving people information so they can decide what they want to call it. Unfortunately, some of these words have become so politicized. The minute they come out of someone's mouth, people have kind of a judgment call on what they think you believe. And so really trying to give everyone the information so you can decide what you think you want to call it. As far as the death statistics are tough. I'm not saying just one died. I'm saying that we don't have a full picture of what happened. And you're right, even in Texas, we're still getting information about, people who live in Texas and how many died. So that's a real problem.
Stephen in Sarasota, Florida.
Thank you for taking my call.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Question or comment, please?
A question and a comment, two of them. One, why would we have changed, or why did the current president change the policies that were in place and stabilize the border? That's number one. Number two is a statement and a question. A lot of my clients that I work with and friends that are Mexican, they're all in favor of the border wall, in part because they said they've been exposed and their relatives are exposed to the dangers themselves, and they work here legally and they filed for their paperwork. They feel that it's unreasonable that anybody else should keep coming in this massive way as a form of, it hurts their jobs, it hurts their income. So I would like to know why the president changed all these borders. It's like Trump derangement syndrome, not what's best for the country.
Okay.
So, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Biden administration. I can talk about some of the impacts of the policies. I mean, you can hear from the president's people daily about the change in policy and why they did it. And again, it's been very limited, the changes, but of course has had an impact on who's coming and who's coming across. I can address the border wall question because I've covered that for many, many years under different administrations, the wall, the fence, whatever we want to call it, steel slats. And that has been a tool for Border Patrol to deter some people, slow some people down. They will tell you it's just one of many tools. It's not the end all be all for immigration policy. People are still coming over the bigger, better wall, as the Trump administration described it, 30-foot steel slats. I did a story a couple of weeks ago about people, basically just getting ladders and climbing over. Some are falling to their death, many are just seriously injured, and others are making it across and heading into the U.S. So the wall sounds like a great solution to some people, especially those who don't live on the border. It's one of many tools, and it has not and will not. You'll hear from many Border Patrol agents, stop everyone.
Roger in Nebraska. Roger, go ahead. All right, one last call for Roger in Nebraska. Kathy in Poolville, Texas.
Yes, ma'am. This lady is not telling the truth. She must be with I don't know, she must be covering up the Biden administration or something, because these people are coming in surges. I mean, it is the border crisis.
Okay, Kathy, you got to turn down your telephone. She says, though, Angela, that it's a crisis. Your response?
Well, again, Kathy, you can certainly call it that. That's if that's the word you want to use, and plenty of people do call it that. I'm not saying don't use that word. And yes, we are seeing huge numbers of people. I'm not disputing that or covering that up. I'm covering that right now, every day. I see the large numbers of people. They are coming, and many are being sent back to Mexico. And I heard the last caller said we should, send everyone back to Mexico, and people would feel comfortable on this side. That's probably true, but Mexico's our neighbor, and that's creating a humanitarian problem there, and real stresses and strains, and we don't want big problems right next door with our neighbors either. So that. I'm not trying to cover anything up. I welcome you to come down. We're happy to show you around there. It's very clear what's happening. We can see it.
Angela Kocherga, what happens to the communities on the United States side of the border when you have a humanitarian situation in Mexico?
Well, humanitarian groups actually along this stretch of border work very well together and have shelters that are connected on both sides. And people here will respond to try and help the best they can. And Mexico is getting some funding to help with that humanitarian situation, but it is a real concern. And of course, here where we live, Mexico is not just people may look at it as a foreign country. Lots of ties, economic ties, family ties. This is a concern for people. We have relatives on both sides. So what happens on one side does affect the other.
Barbara in Oklahoma City.
Hi. Boy, this border thing, I just wish that one day, Greta, that C-SPAN would just one time have a show about Trump he has hired them, immigrants, his whole life. And while he's been president, and twice before he was president, he's had to pay $25 million, at least $25 million for some reason. He lost. They sued him for their wages. He hires illegals. He doesn't pay them. And once while he was president, they said they fired 20. I'm like, I thought you didn't hire them. No, he hires them, and he has for 50 years. And I wish that would be said. And also his Trump University that he steals money from. But this border thing, he's just. Oh, he's going to do something about the border. He does it all right. It's open to him. And right now he has, I don't even know it. I mean, it's just crazy.
Okay, Barbara, let me go on to Chuck, who's in New Mexico.
Hello.
Hi, Chuck, in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Go ahead.
Yes, I had a question about. I just had been watching the news. I guess yesterday, finally, the media was allowed into like the Ghana facility, and I saw one of the worst things I've seen ever. I'm 35 years old, and I saw these kids that the lady said they were not being tested, or she was unsure about COVID. These kids are lying down to sleep, shoulder to shoulder, head to head. They were packed in there. The facility said it was supposed to take 250 people. There's 4,100 people in this building, and the lady will not call it a crisis. Now, to me, I saw that, and I wrote to my senator because I thought it was horrific to treat people, any people, that way. And I was wondering if she has seen anything like that. This is ridiculous, just for political reasons.
Okay, Chuck, let's get it. Let's ask Angela Kocherga. Have you been inside any of these facilities?
I have, not this administration. Hoping to get in one here soon. I'm glad they're finally opening it up for people to take a look. And I have seen what you said. You haven't seen anything like this before. I have seen this before, and that's unfortunate. I've seen these overcrowded holding stations. There was one in particular that held children during the last administration. And yes, these are not places for children, crowded together, very young children. And that's before COVID. So of course, there are real concerns about the pandemic. So yes, these overcrowding situations that are causing such concern happened just about 2 years ago. And so it's very hard to forget those images. And I did report extensively, and others did. So this is again a repeat of what we've seen, and no real attempt over multiple administrations to figure out, rather than react to the problem, how, if this happens again, which it will calm down and then it will probably happen again, how are we going to handle the change in migration, which is primarily children and now families from Central America? What are we going to do in a humane way instead of trying to do things the same way we've always done them?
We'll go to South Carolina. Russell, your question or comment?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I have been taking a good look at this crisis, as a lot of people say. But people, when the country is allowing their children to come to our country, that's a tragedy in itself. And I think the solution would be for us to actually build a safe zone, where El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras, where those countries in Central America, where their territorial borders meet, we should purchase a couple of miles of land, build a camp, have it as a safe zone, and have it as the processing center to process anyone who wants to come to the United States without even having to go through Mexico. It could be done through the military. As much as we're spending already, we would actually mitigate our costs by having a camp there, and the children wouldn't have to come so far. They would just have to come out of their country to the border, and that would be the solution.
Okay,
So,
Angela Kocherga.
Well, actually, the administration is looking at ways to do just that. Maybe not a camp, because you don't want an extended like refugee camp to sprout up, but you're right, to actually do some of these asylum claims in these home countries to avoid that long, expensive, and dangerous journey, so that the claims can be processed, or at least initially started there in the home country. So that is definitely something that the current administration is looking at. So that's an idea that you're suggesting, and they seem to think is a good one.
How much money does it cost on average to pay a guide, and what do some people have to do to get here?
That really is the other part of this tragedy. It ranges depending upon where you're coming from, and how far you have to travel, and which country and which guide. But for example, the woman I talked to from El Salvador, and others from guides, it can range as high as $8,000 right now. Now you say, how can someone who's fleeing poverty and violence afford that? Often what little property they have, or whatever they have of value, is used as collateral, and an initial down payment is made. And I'm hearing right now it's about $2,000. And sometimes people borrow from families. Some are able to actually take out loans, and then they are, with this understanding, they will make installment payments once they are able to reach the U.S. and likely get work. The other problem that happens along the way, sometimes the fee goes up and they end up paying more money, and if they can't, or being charged more money. And so and there's this idea, like as we saw with other migrants in our history, people become indebted to these guides, these smugglers. And so that's that's basically organized crime, and they're under their thumb, and there are real risks to them, not just money wise of taking their property, but sometimes safety risks if they don't pay.
And once they get to the United States, if they are able to get into the United States, how does this organized crime network have tentacles inside the United States to get that money from them?
Well, we have, these groups are international. Just like with, drug smuggling, human smuggling. So people are on both sides, and plenty of U.S. citizens and others are involved in this trade. Often it's just like you would pay your bank loan, they pay. And so that's what happens. But if you can't pay, that's when you run into problems. So these groups are on both sides of the border. They do not stop at the border. And these are international, so it's not just foreigners involved, but obviously U.S. citizens in this lucrative trade.
Laura in Baltimore, we'll go to you next. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you, C-SPAN, as usual, for trying to shed some knowledge and light on this issue. It'd be great if you had this guest on more often, because I just think people are intellectually spinning their wheels on the immigration issue without a lot of clarity. I just wanted to say something about the remittances, and that's a huge part of this whole thing. Of course, people are going to be beating down the doors of the United States if they can come in and just illegally and make money and send it out. And the last time I checked the Pew Research website, I thought most remittances were going to China and India. And yeah, we're focused on the folks that are coming across the border. Many of them are Mexicans, but I understand they're from all over Latin America, Africa, every place, because that is the weakest spot. Also, Puerto Rico is another border that people don't talk about. And I agree with Noam Chomsky that it's just going to get worse as the climate crisis continues. I talk to people, I speak Spanish, I talk to people from Central America who tell me they're here because they can't work their farms because they need the chemicals to have a crop, and climate change has just ruined their livelihood there. So there's so many problems, and it's so complicated, and we just need to take it issue by issue, and we can figure it out. I also wanted to say something about the Catholic Church's role in this what's happening right now with this many folks coming in. And how instrumental they've been in bringing people illegally into the country. And also, I watched Spanish television, and this had been predicted months ago, and people were saying, look, people were massing at the border on the other side, and al otro lado, right? That's what we are, the other side. And they were just waiting there for the outcome of the election, and they spoke openly of this. So anyway, I know I put a lot out there, but thank you again, C-SPAN. Thanks. Bye. I'll listen to my answer off the air.
Okay.
So there's a lot there, but one thing I will talk about, a couple things. That the climate change situation is real for people in Central America. One small coffee farmer said he fled because he in Honduras, as he put it, that we had 2 hurricanes and it flooded half the country, and he really was struggling to make ends meet. As far as coming for jobs, yes, that's been for generations. And we can point the finger at the workers, but what about the employers? I can't tell you how many 14, 15, 16-year-olds I've interviewed coming across the border or deeper in Central America and Mexico said, yeah, I am risking it all, but I know I've got a job waiting for me. I've got a busboy job. My cousin told me to come, that this place where he works wants people. So we also have, we depend on these workers, a lot of service jobs, and not to mention farm workers. And yet we seem shocked when they come and they're actually able to quickly find work. We are also seeing an uptick because now as the U.S. economy is opening, especially here in Texas, people know there are jobs, and the pandemic has ravaged their economies. And so they have a real incentive to get out and start looking for work.
Russ in California sends us this text. Nobody talks about Mexico's culpability in this. make them stop the flow before Central Americans cross into their country. Mexico keeps getting a pass.
So that's been a long time criticism. You're right, Russ. And I have to tell you, under the last administration, the one thing that worked very quickly, I'm not saying it's the only thing, was when Mexico called out its National Guard on its southern and northern border. And one of the strangest things I've seen as a reporter who's covered this region for so long is Mexican National Guard stopping Central American families trying to cross into the U.S., trying to reach the U.S., the fence, in fact, the wall, to peek through and ask Border Patrol, turn themselves in, ask Border Patrol for asylum. So that really did slow down people coming. There are real concerns, real humanitarian concerns about using a military force against civilians. And we've already seen some problems on Mexico's southern border where a man was shot returning to Guatemala. And the military there has said that they made a mistake, and they're going to work with the family of the gentleman, the man who was shot. He was returning to his country in a vehicle when he was fired upon. So real concerns about what that means, but it did slow down the number of people crossing in the past.
Another text, why are the Haitians deported quicker and the problems they are running from are the same or worse in our cities? Is there different criteria depending on where you're coming from, like Cuba or Haiti?
Well, it depends on where you are. The Haitians, like everyone, they were being expelled. That's the term used, returned to Mexico. In this area, we have seen lots of Haitians allowed into the country and in El Paso, and they're in migrant shelters. I think it depends on where along the border. We have seen differences where Mexico will accept people back onto the Mexican side. Yes, they are fleeing, and seeking asylum. And we do have a lot of Cubans, too, who've come through, and even Nicaraguans who, of course, are fleeing very serious conditions and threats there. We actually have a thriving Cuban community in the Mexican city Juarez because they've been waiting there so long. Somebody mentioned amassing at the border. People have been told to wait in Mexico as their immigration hearings proceed on the U.S. side. So a lot of them have waited there, and that's what we're seeing.
So no longer is there a different policy for Cubans?
No, that ended a while back. So no, they are not given preferential treatment, which has a lot of Cubans very concerned and upset about that. But no, they are treated as every other migrant, especially along land ports of entry.
Johnny in Gulfport, Mississippi. Good morning to you, Johnny.
Good morning. The thing I'd like to hear the lady talk about is the difference between where the river is and where the wall is built. If the way I understand it, the Border Patrol does not control the border between where the wall is and where the river is. And since they're not doing that, when they get across the river, regardless of whether they're on the north side of the wall or the south side of the wall, they're in the United States.
Johnny,
and the situation changes.
Are you talking about the Rio Grande? What are you talking about?
The Rio Grande River, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so you're right. The Rio Grande River, right in the middle of the river, is where the border starts. And so the wall, the fence, whatever we're calling it now, is built solely on U.S. soil for a lot of reasons. Obviously, you can't build a wall in a river, and we have flood control issues along the border. But also the U.S. wanted that structure to be solely on U.S. soil so Border Patrol could do maintenance, so they can ride along either side. So by the time someone reaches that wall, that fence, they are on U.S. soil, which is why many are, when they seek asylum, just come right up and peek through and try and turn themselves into Border Patrol. So, but it would be very difficult to have a wall in the middle of a river, and also to, even those who advocate in Border Patrol and CBP who say the wall is an important tool, they acknowledge it will not work everywhere, and so you have to be strategic where you put this. And again, it slows people down. It's not going to stop everyone.
Wade in Edgefield, South Carolina.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. The way I see it, the biggest problem we have in our country today is we don't have a leader for president. We have a follower, and he'll follow Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer right into doomsday for this country. I mean, it's more than apparent with all that's going on, not just the immigrant situation, but the situation in general. We're going downhill, and our follower is leading us, unfortunately. Thank you for taking my call.
I didn't hear a question there, so.
What did you hear? Something to respond to about his thoughts?
The only thing I would say, I know a lot of people, and especially here on the border, for multiple administrations, I've been criticized for not using the word crisis, again, because it's been so politicized. I have heard local leaders and some residents say, yes, there really is a crisis, but it's not here on the border. It's in Washington because multiple administrations have failed to have the political will to really do something to look at the situation and take action, whether it's immigration reform or other types of policies to deal with migration in a holistic way. So that's the crisis that people here will point the finger at, and they will point towards Washington, where very little has happened.
Susan in Florida, good morning to you. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just think that folks are just really missing the point of all of this and all of this immigration. It's about importing as many Democrat-leaning voters as they can. They just want an open border. And the Democrats are also fighting any type of voter ID and want illegal immigrants to also be able to vote. And is it true that they're receiving money, like $1,100, to relocate to wherever they want to?
So I'll take the last part. No, they're not receiving money to relocate. In fact, the humanitarian groups here, there's a shelter, it gets in touch with relatives or family members, and they have to pay for their own. Often it's a bus ticket. They certainly can't afford, some can afford flights if they get help from their relatives, but no one's giving them cash payouts to go wherever they want. Secondly, as far as voting Democrat, you probably saw in the last election in heavily Hispanic South Texas, President Trump did pretty well. So I don't know that's an automatic pass, that if you're of a certain ethnicity or you trace your roots to Mexico, that you're going to automatically vote Democrat. And as far as, again, the election rolls have been checked, and we have not found, widespread abuses by immigrants trying to pass themselves off as citizens and vote. In fact, the opposite is true, and we have a real problem in trying to engage more, especially young Latino U.S. citizen voters to get involved and actually cast ballots. So that's the problem we're seeing here.
Angela Kocherga, what is it like to be a Border Patrol?
What's it like to be a Border Patrol?
Yeah, official. I mean, what's it like if that's your job?
Well, over the years, I've talked to many, and still, they can't always speak openly, but it's been a very stressful job, dating back to the last administration, where we had these similar issues where they became babysitters and had to take care of large numbers of children in holding cells. It takes a real toll, and I think the biggest crisis for them, and I will use that word, was when they were involved in the family separations, where they had to grab screaming children out of the arms of their parents and carry out that duty. That took a real toll. And so it's been tough, and they've been embroiled. This is an agency that typically doesn't get involved in politics, but their union and others have been part of the political discourse and out there speaking out. So it's been hard on the rank and file. I think you have good people want to do the best they can to protect the border and be caring and humane with the people they take into custody. So I think it's very stressful. We are seeing, people leave Border Patrol. There's an effort to recruit more, but there has been attrition. And that's the other part of this. So much focus on the fence. You'll hear from agents that the boots on the ground, the actual people who are carrying out the work, they did not get that attention they needed. There was not the hiring that was needed. And they need to really, look at what's happening with the men and women of the Border Patrol.
Angela Kocherga has been covering the border for KTEP Public Radio. She's the news director for them and reporter as well in El Paso, Texas. You can find her reporting at ktep.org, as well as following her on Twitter at Angela K. Border. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
We're going to take you live to the Supreme Court, where the justices are hearing a case dealing with pay for college athletes.
Oyez, oyez. All persons having business before the Honorable